Hello, game masters and dungeon keepers. Let's make a map. I will be making a simple map to demonstrate how I make maps. My workflow focuses on speed rather than quality since I tend to not have much time to make maps but still want to use them in my games. So I will show you a couple things I do to make the process quick and easy. The tool I'm using is called Krita. It's a free and open source painting program. The map I want to paint will be a simple small hut on a coast with a beach and maybe a mountain with a secret cave. Let's say a witch lives there and we want to have an encounter in that place. Let's start by making a new file. The size of it will be around 1000 by 1000. First, I start by making the ground layer. In my workflow, I heavily use groups. Second thing I heavily use is fill layers and use of patterns. They make it easy to fill the image with whatever I need. Let's start with bare earth, some dirt to cover the base. Rest of those default layers are no longer needed. Second thing I do for the ground is I vary it up with at least two more layers, and for each I will make a separate group. First will be sparse grass, and second will be for more fuller grass. And each of those will also be fill layers, and I will use patterns for that. Let's see. This is what I want to use. However, transform will let us change the size of this pattern. It's quite large for what we need. 50% should be enough. So now, what do? We have covered our soil with the sparse grass. What I do is use fill layers and I generate noise for them. So it will serve us as transparency mask. However, I don't transform it into transparency mask. Instead, what I do is I add a filter mask that will turn the color of this mask into alpha layer of this mask, and I change the blending to be erase. This way we have some transparency as this layer, black and white layer, removes parts of our sparse grass. And it allows us to keep the properties of this fill layer, so if we want we can adjust it. I will do the same for the other grass. I will choose fill layer with pattern, and let's see, maybe this is good. And I will also scale it. And I will repeat and make the alpha value for this layer. I think I will leave it like this for now. The frequency allows us to change how big this noise is. We can always adjust it thanks to this trick. So now we have more varied ground than with just soil or just spare grass. We don't have to rely on our textures to provide this variety, and we can adjust it according to how we want this to be. This trick also works with anything else. If you want to draw your alpha yourself, but I find that using just noises gives a good enough effect for most of the needs. Next, I think I want to add a beach to this map. Something to make it more interesting. I will enclose it in a separate group. And let's start with adding some sand to make a little border between the water and the ground. For that, I use fill layer. This usually works. However, here, since I want the post to be in a specific place, I will add a regular transparency mask. I will clear it with delete key, and I will use a regular brush. Whatever brush is good. I think I will use this one. I made it myself for various uses. It is a simple brush. It uses one of the pre-packaged textures Krita comes with. The only thing I change in it is I made it use fuzzed up rotation, so it gives more random appearance. Let's say I want this to be in this corner. The water will be mostly northeast. Something like this will do. Maybe like this. The key map making, in my opinion, is to not spend too much time on it, since if you want to use maps, usually you want to have lots of them. So there is no point in spending too much time on a single one. Next, let's make the water. This will be also a fill layer. I will use a pattern. By the way, all those patterns that I'm using do not come with Krita by default. I added them myself, and the process is easy, so I think you will figure it out. But making a large library of textures for your map making is very useful in my opinion. I have a couple of textures for water that I like. This one, for example. And I will repeat the same steps as for sand. And I will do a little water in the corner like this. However, one thing that I find to be not good looking is just solid water. What I like is to use blending modes to make the water blend into the sand, since usually it will be translucent. You will be able to see the sand in the water. For this texture, soft light works quite well. It gives somewhat subtle look. However, your textures might look better with other modes. Maybe overlay would look better, or maybe screen if you want to turn it into ice, for example. I will stick with soft light. However, one thing that we can also do to make this look a little better is to add some shadow to indicate depth of the water. For that, I think a gradient tool would be useful. And let's make it like this, maybe. Let's use solid gradient, foreground to background for this one. I will swap those colors with X key. Yes, I think that is better. I see that this covers everything, which I do not want. For that, I can use inherit alpha feature. So the shadow only covers what I want. This allows me greater choice for blending modes. I think for this case and shadows in general, most often multiply blending mode looks best. Go back to solid white color, and I think that will do it for the beach. Next thing I usually do are walls, since those greatly affect how the map is played, where the players can go. For that, I need to use grid and guides. Those are great tools to help you draw along the lines that your map will use as your grid tiles. What I do is I snap to grid, so my brushes snap to the grid, and I show the grid. I tend to make my maps 50 pixel size. So each 50 pixels is a grid tile on a map. You can use however you want, and the larger you will make your grid size, the larger the map usually will need to be. So it is up to you how large you want it to be. However, make sure that this number stays the same across your maps to make it easier to import them into your tabletop application. Next thing I want to choose a tool. For walls, I either use square tool or I use polyline tool. This allows greater versatility for the choosing shape of the room. However, when making simple square rooms, usually square tool is good enough. I will show how to access the grid and guides panel if you don't have it turned on by default. And you do that by going to settings, dockers, and grid and guides. That is where you can turn it on or off. To paint the walls, I have another brush I made, which is a simple brush, just a simple square brush with rotation set to drawing angle, so it follows the angle I draw. This way I can make consistent looking walls. First, let's get our group walls. So those can be locked, so I don't accidentally change them. For walls, I use fill layers, as you may have predicted. For this, I think this should be good enough. Let's say the hat here is somewhat not in good shape. I will adjust the size. Maybe 30% is good enough. However, we don't want the wall to be the wall of our map, so we need a paint layer to control where the walls are, which will serve as our wall alpha. And the pattern layer will inherit this alpha from our alpha layer. This way it gives us easy way to manipulate where those walls will be placed. I make sure that size of the brush is 10 pixels. So when I draw along the border, it goes 5 pixels each side, so it doesn't cover too much of each tile. And let's make a hat. Make it here. start at one corner and draw it another. As you can see, the brush automatically snaps to the grid, making it easier to draw walls. One thing I didn't check is tool options. That is where you check how your brush works. For walls using square tool, we do not want it filled. So let's delete it and redo it. Walls done. We do not have to do anything else to get our walls pretty. What we can do to make them pretty, however, is use layer styles. That will help us to make them look great with basically no effort. What I use for walls is outer glow, and I use it for shadows. Why not shadow? Because shadow casts shadows in one direction. Outer glow spreads around your layer, and I find that to look a lot better. Change blending mode to multiply works, but can also be normal for shadows. Both work. I will go with multiply this time. And I make it black. Not solid black, just almost black. Now, size determines how far away those shadows will spread. I think 10 pixels is good enough. Next, I use bevel. Bevel gives appearance of 3D-ness. I pay attention to size of it. It should not be more than half of the width of your line, otherwise it will just not look good. Maybe 3 will look good here. And soften rounds, bevel, corners. That should work for walls. 2 pixels of soften and 3 pixels of bevel. Next thing I do is I add to that texture to make this bevel more textured. And here it is important to choose the same texture you use for the layer you're making. In my case, it is this. Scale should be the same. I have 50% scale. And depth, usually 10 is good enough. Last thing I use is stroke. Stroke I use basically mostly to give walls outline. It outlines your layer. It allows it to pop out of the background better. So with all of this we can accept and grade walls at no cost. I can turn off the grid, and as you can see, they look quite well. And all we did was just a simple square, nothing more. Next, we will add windows and doors. Let's start with windows. And here I do similarly. I add fill layer with pattern. Windows usually have frames made out of wood, I tend to prefer to make them have light shade. Let's keep it like this and see how it will work. Window pattern. And we will add paint layer to serve as our alpha. Window alpha. And for windows and doors, I pretty much always use polyline. And the same brush as for walls. I turn on the grid to see where the windows should go. And let's say window will go here. Click, click, enter. Window done. Now we will do the same thing as for walls. Get ourselves a beautiful window for free. I add shadow. Multiply around 10 pixels of this shadow. I add bevel, however, here I make direction down. This way, windows are a little more distinct from doors, which will keep the direction up. I make sure the texture is the same. Size and depth would also be correct. And I make outline of 1 pixel. And now our window is done. However, we need a door. For that, we can just duplicate this, make it doors. And we will clear this and draw doors here. And we will change the layer style to be up. So it pops up and creates sort of a door frame. And I tend to prefer to use slightly darker wood for the door frame, which will require changing of layer style, make it more consistent with itself. So that creates our portals. For the floors, I use also fill layers. Let's use this one and make sure the size is correct. Maybe that will do. Let's name this to not make it confusing. Doors. Pattern. And let's add it. Add transparency to this. Just simple transparency. Delete key to clear it. And square tool with fill option enabled. I don't need outline. I do want to have a grid. and it is done. However, we should make sure the floors are below walls. Now it looks much better. Simple hut in the wilderness is done. However, we can make it better. We can add a roof to it. Usually, you would want to have roofs of various sizes and shapes as separate images, so you can import them either into your image or into your virtual tabletop. Most often, I don't make any roofs in my maps. Instead, I make them in a virtual tabletop, since that allows me to use features of that tabletop to dynamically hide the roof when players enter underneath it. However, for sake of completeness, I can show how I usually would make such a roof. First, I will make a fill layer with a pattern, and I have a thatched roof texture. It should be good enough. And I will add transparency to it. One thing that I recommend doing is to not paint the roof wall, all of it, just half of it, depending on which way the slope of it goes. So, for example, like this, we have one way, and I make the second roof. One will be roof south, and other will be north. This I will clear, and I will paint it the other way. And in properties here, I will make sure it is turned. Now we have a roof, more or less, a crappy roof. Not very good roof. However, we can make it better. Because all this roof needs is some good shading. Roof shading. For that, I use gradient with bilinear shape, and let's make it go from the center directly down. Something like this. Inherit alpha, so it is only over the roof. And now can make it overlay. No, not great. Multiply maybe. This is good enough. Now the roof looks better. We have simple roof. Don't need to do much more with it. I wanted to have a mountain next to the hut with a secret cave. Let's do that. As you predicted, I use a fill layer with a pattern. or a stone of some kind. Maybe this is good enough. And I will use a paint layer to control the alpha of the stone. Mountain pattern and mountain alpha. For larger structures and such as mountains, I typically use my solid blob brush, the same one I painted the beach with. And let's make it in this corner. Shift and click allows me to quickly adjust the size of the brush. Let's make this like this. This will be a slightly sizable mountain next to this hut. Because we will want some space for the cave inside it. To draw the cave, I will shrink it back. And what I will do is turn this brush into eraser mode. Just erase a cave into it. The second brush I sometimes use for caves especially is this one. It's pretty much the same as that blob one, but with square tip. This gives more square edges to the cave. You can toggle eraser mode with E key. Let's make it like this. And have a second one like this. Useful thing to do is to show the grid when you're sculpting your caves, so you know exactly how the movement will work inside it. Let's say this cave should have probably one square in entrance, so nothing can just, no army can pour out or into it. And here we will make sure that it is not awkward to move around in this cave. We make it like this. It doesn't have to be square, but we can make the shape interesting. Second thing is, of course, we can style it similarly to walls as before. Let's use multiply and 10 pixels in size. We can do bevel, and since this is a large mountain, let's give it 20 pixels in size and maybe 5 pixels in softness. Can use the texture to give it better shading, and 10% in depth, otherwise it will look funky. Stroke for outline to make it pop out better, and that is it. We have good looking mountain with a cave inside. However, this cave needs to have a floor, since grass wouldn't grow inside there. Let's add it inside ground group. Let's make a group, or let's make it a simple fill layer with a simple alpha mask. Let's make a pattern and something that would look good enough in a cave. This one will work. And let's add transparency, delete, clear it, and we can use the same brush to find where this ground should go. At the entrance, however, I want it to more gently transition out, so I will use airbrush for that. This is the default airbrush that comes with Krita. A little bit of it at the entrance gives better transition. One thing I would want is to maybe make this cave ground maybe a little less saturated. For that I will add filter mask with adjustment to saturation. 20 points should be enough. Yeah, I think I'm happy with it. Another thing we should do for this cave, since it is supposed to be a secret cave, is a roof over the top of it. So no one will know it's there. For that, I am thinking of making a duplicate of this. I will put it into the roof to keep all the roofs in one place. The alpha will be deleted and replaced. We don't need any styles here. Roof is done. Now we can import this into virtual tabletop, and we will be able to toggle this on and off. Players will not know about this cave until they discover it. Another thing we can do here is add a little garden nearby the house. Since someone lives here, they will need to grow food or something. And let's add it inside the ground group. Let's get this out of our grass. Let's do a simple fill layer with a pattern. And maybe this will work good enough. Transparency, clear with delete, and let's turn our grid back on, and we will use the rectangle tool. Let's use airbrush because I want outline to be brush, and size I will make it 10. So it will automatically make the outline of this square soft. This way it look slightly more natural. One thing I will want is to change the size of this, maybe 60%. And usually that would be it for the map I make, because any vegetation I tend to add inside virtual tabletops, since players tend to like to play with fire, so when they do, I think it makes it cool when I can just remove any bushes that they burn up, or trees they chop down, or whatever else they decide to do. However, I can show you how I make those various vegetations if that is not required. Let's make a simple garden. We will start by making a group vegetation and a subgroup the garden. For all sorts of vegetations, it is also useful to use patterns. And which one works? It all depends on what kind of vegetations you want to use. And I use this brush for making the various grasses and plants of small plants, which uses random rotation and uses one of the default brush tips. And let's make a couple lines. Okay, and we have some sorts of plants there. Let's say a witch lives here, and she has some herbs here. Let's make a layer for herbs. Flowers, let's call them. And for flowers, I've made a special brush that uses one of the included predefined tips, and I made it also randomly rotate. However, I also added a hue and saturation to randomness. So each time a flower is painted, it will be painted in a different color, and that can be manipulated with those values. So if I want to have less saturated colors, I can turn this down, and I have a preview here, or more saturated. Same with the colors. You can manipulate which colors there are. So if you want just blue flowers, with just a little bit of randomness in shade, you can do that. Same if you want some sort of red or purple flowers. I will say there will be lots of different flowers, so I will just put it around here. So greens that are up there will not be selected for the colors, since few flowers are green. And size 10 is good enough, and I will just plop, 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 plop. And we have a garden. Let's give it a little bit more shape, and maybe stroke. Maybe little less of this, maybe down, and we have some lowers. One thing we can also do is change position of the outline to be center, so it is not as pronounced. I just yeah, I think that works better. A simple garden, very easy. Next, let's add some shrubbery. Bushes. Let's add the paint layer. Bushes alpha. And let's add a pattern to those. And let's add this one. And let's set it to multiply. For the bushes, I tend to use this brush, which is just simple random rotation with one of the default brush tips. And the way I paint those is as follows. Let's adjust the size, maybe 25 will be better. I will turn on the grid to know exactly where I am painting those, since players might want to use those brushes to conceal themselves, either to sneak up to the hut, or maybe as some sort of cover to use in combat should it take place here. Let's say there is some shrubbery here, and the way I paint it, just make a circle. And as with everything, brush styles do the rest. I give it shadow. I give it a stroke to better outline it, and I give it a little bit of bevel with the same texture that I used, which is this. Depth pretty much always should be 10%, otherwise it looks weird. And we have a simple bush. we can make more of those. And populate the area with all sorts of bushes. Let's make one here, so it covers slightly the mountain, which should also mean the vegetation should be above the mountain. Now the brush will cover bits of the mountain. Add some more bushes around the place. I try to make them conform to the grid so they not only serve the purpose of making things pretty, but also they help make the game mechanics work with the map. Okay, let's say that is enough for the bushes. Next would be the trees. Trees I tend to make in two parts. First, the stumps, and second, inside the roofs, I make the tree crowns. Let's do the stumps first. The stumps will be just a paint layer. Because we will use pretty much only a color overlay for them, making them slightly brown. Maybe like this. And let's give them a stroke. However, we will not use black color. Instead, brown color will do. You will see why in a moment. I've made a special brush to paint stumps. It doesn't paint the most beautiful or realistic stumps. However, for purpose of making maps quickly, this pretty much does the job. What it is a simple brush tip, this round one, and I adjust the size so it shrinks with time. And I use a gradient instead of plain color for the source, and mix determines which part of the gradient is taken, and it is set to fuzzed up, which is random. Let's say I want to make a tree at the entrance, so it is more secret. The way I paint those is simple, although it requires a certain motion with use of this brush. Let me show you. As you've seen, I move my cursor up and down slightly, which, with shrinking and random colors, gives me those rings as it shrinks down, and the stroke placed on the layer, which we can make 2 pixels, make it more pronounced, gives it an appearance of bark. Let's also add a shadow, slight shadow. Now we have a simple tree stump that will be visible on the map. The size of those can be also adjusted. Say we want slightly larger tree stump, and we can go here. Another tree stump. Another one. Let's make a couple smaller ones here. Done. This small one will be here. And let's make one more. I try to not make them larger than the size of the grid. Let's put one here maybe. Yes, that is good. And we have 3 stumps very quickly, fairly easy. Now all that is left is to make 3 crowns. For that we will use an alpha layer. And we will use a fill layer. Let's use this one maybe. I will set it to multiply, so we can use not just flat color, but shade of it. And I will also use a special brush that I've made for making 3 crowns. It is a simple brush which uses one of the default Krita brush tips. It also shrinks in time in 1 second. It is intended to paint just 1 tree crown per stroke. I added a mirror to give the tree a little more variety. The mirror will flip the brush tip every 0.05 seconds, so it will hopefully give more varied trees. I also use random rotation, and I use varied values for the color, which makes each time the brush applies color to the canvas, it will change what the shade of this color is based on time, which will make it brighter with time, and based on randomness, which will make each stroke random. Each time it applies, it will apply it in random shade. I also change the painting mode to build up to allow the brush to paint over itself, so it is not even. And now we can paint. Size is 150, and let's paint something. I use more circular motion rather than up and down for this. And we have a tree crown. Now let's make sure it looks good. This can be slightly bigger shadow, and I can adjust spread a little, which makes the shadow more pronounced. Next, bevel usually does not work good with trees. I tend to prefer satin at half value. This will give it a slight shade at the borders, and also I think stroke will make it pop out a little better. We have a 3, though I think the stroke should not be as strong. Let's make a couple more. This one is big, so I will make it also bigger in the crown. Done. Done. We have 3 crowns. Turn off the grid, and we have the map. The furniture for the inside and whatever would be in the cave, I pretty much always make in the virtual tabletop that I use, and that allows me to make the map more reusable, so I can reuse it in different places and maybe different situations, so I can change it between different times player visit the place, and maybe players will want to carry stuff around or steal a sofa or a bed. That will make it possible. One thing I can also do is to make a path. Let's make it here. Will be a simple paint layer. Dirt path. Usually for paths, airbrush is the best. And it can be pretty much like this. Maybe here a little. Here. And maybe like this. Next, we can use styles to give the layer a pattern. That is another way. And let's give it maybe this pattern. And that will be it. I will just make it less visible and probably make it an overlay to make it blend a little better into the background. One thing I noticed is I made this brush a little too close to the door, so let's fix that. let's use this. Use this tool. And done. And that is how I make maps for my games. Good luck in your map making.